Welcome to Teachers Teaching on the Prairie, located in Southeast Colorado. This podcast will explore issues and best practices in education. It's really a self-directed group of classroom teachers getting together to seek answers, explore successes, and share ideas. Teachers Teaching on the Prairie. Hi, we are here at our first podcast that we're going to call Teachers Teaching on the Prairie because we are from the East Otero School District in La Junta, Colorado, which is definitely on the prairie in Colorado. And so we have gathered together to start kind of an exploration of ideas, getting some great minds together and exploring some of the issues and topics that are of interest to us or things that we're wrestling with in our teaching here at La Junta High School. Here we have some teachers. So today's episode is going to center around standard-based grading and the experiment that's going on, and I guess the reality of what's going on with that at our school. And so I have gathered 3 teachers, and hopefully Crystal will be here and join us as well from the 4th grade and talk about that experiment that they're doing down there with it as well. So let's just go around here and tell us who you are and what you are teaching here.
I'm Justin Miller. I teach 7 through 12 visual arts.
And Chris Ludwig. I teach high school science, variety of preps, biology, physics, chemistry, anatomy.
Okay, and I'm Eva Rodriguez, and I teach high school Spanish 1 and Spanish 2.
And I guess I should say I'm Kelly Smith, and I teach English, speech, and drama as well. So I guess we're going to start out with looking at standards-based grading is new to our district, and a few teachers are doing it. It is not the main way that our district is grading, but we have some pockets or core of teachers that are experimenting and using it in their classroom. So let's start out by discussing. Chris, let's start with you because you've been doing it the longest here. Why and what inspired you to start using this method?
Well, I became increasingly connected to a community of teachers outside the school, mostly through Twitter, through social media, and a variety of those teachers would share either on their personal blogs or in short messages on Twitter that they were using this thing called standards-based grades, and it kind of led to an investigation of that. I certainly wasn't happy with the way my grading system was working. I saw that kids were copying papers, and kids that in the grade book had A's, I could point to them and go, there's no way that you're doing A-level work, but my grading system wasn't able to really differentiate between kids that were just completing stuff and turning it in and kids that really understood it. So the major search for me was to find a system that could allow me to drill down to what a kid knew and not what a kid was turning in. And so I was really searching for ways to do that. My initial step was to go the route some people did, which was to try to take out points entirely, almost. So for a while I was doing a thing where I would just record a 1 or a 0 for an assignment so that kids weren't getting this giant bulk of points. Whereas, before I might have had a kid get 20 points for some study guide, and then that racked up over the year, and then if 3 or 4 of those, and that would balance out a bad test score. Mm-hmm. So you didn't really know if the kid was really doing well or whether they had just turned everything in.
Right. Justin?
I was at a very similar place to Chris. Frustrated with knowing that students in my class were achieving great things and not being represented in their grade, and students who were mostly attending class and following directions were getting just exorbitant grades. But really, in art, the grade is not there's a philosophical difference with teaching art and giving a grade. So I was eager to look at some way that I could mark students and let them see that they were learning things without having a number attached to it. And Chris turned me on to the Twitter stuff. I started looking at EdChat, which is a hashtag you can follow on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And it happened that year my planning period was during the EdChat chat on Tuesdays. So I would get on, I think that was 2 years ago, I'd get on and do EdChat during my planning period on Tuesdays. And I learned a lot about teaching. I did more education reading than I would have ever done. And what I finally came up with was there were two things that weren't important. One was homework, because there just wasn't research to back it up. And the other one was having a numeric grade that compiled and rolled over into this big bowl of points. It was really possible to scam the system in a points-based system to either inflate your grade or as the teacher to push a student into a place where they couldn't get their grade up. And neither of those, from the teacher's perspective, it didn't even have to be purposeful, but I could set it up so that a student wouldn't be able to achieve just because of the kind of student they were, even though they may be learning some stuff. I started with one project inside my points-based system, and instead of having a test at the end or a project that I graded, I instead had a set of student conferences at my desk. So at the end of the project, you had to bring your art piece up, and it wasn't as much about what your art piece looked like as the questions you could answer about your art piece. We were using linear perspective, so I said, show me where you've used linear perspective to make the closer things bigger and the farther things smaller. And if they couldn't show me, I knew they hadn't learned it. I found kids who would have gotten D's on the project that actually understood all of the objectives of the lesson. Their hand just wouldn't make the pencil marks it took to demonstrate that in paper. Now, they didn't get an A necessarily on the project, they didn't get full credit, but they did have a way now to document that they had learned all of the objectives save the one, which was produce a piece of artwork. Well, before that kid would have gotten a D or an F. Now that kid was seeing B or an A possibilities, and so I saw this as a really great way for me to pinpoint what the kid had learned. And I also looked at the way I was compiling points. It looked like most of my points were coming from, you're sitting in your desk one day and I say turn in your project, and so you get out of your desk and you walk over to the turn in slot, and that was 50 points out of 100. And either you got it or you didn't. And I'm like, I don't want to assign points for walking from your desk to the turn-in slot. That's ridiculous. So I was like, well, we got to change that.
Yeah.
So once I started really working, I read quite a few things by Alfie Kohn. Joe Bauer is a big fan of Alfie Kohn. I read some of his stuff. I like Joe Bauer and his blog For the Love of Learning, because as a teacher who doesn't have time to read everything, he digests it for me really nicely and spits out great research in big chunks of quotes. He's like, well, I'm doing this because these 4 people said so. And then he spits out a couple paragraphs from each one. I can skim their material without having to read their books, which as the art teacher, I'm not necessarily a speed reader, so I need that from somebody. And I got hooked up with him because of EdChat. And I got to see that he was saying things I thought, I almost agree with that 100%, or I kind of agree with that. But there's truth in there that I am experiencing in my classroom. And so there were several others, and I don't know everybody's names. I think Chris could probably fill in better some of the other people who are writing on standards-based.
Yeah, there's an awful lot. Some of the people that inspired me, there's an awful lot of math people that do that, because math breaks itself down really nicely into discrete skills.
Science and math that it fits well with.
There is, but basically any topic you can deal with. I mean, you have a list of standards coming down from the state or from OJC or from wherever. If you have a list of standards, you can make a standards-based grade kind of thing. But I think some of the people that I got hooked up with, Matt Townsley and Frank Noschese, are math and science types, that they are seemingly leading the way, at least in this wave that I've followed, that I've gotten hooked up with. That could just be because that's who I was looking for, with science teachers doing standards-based grades. So,
Eva, tell us how you got started.
Well, I started exploring the idea of the standards-based last year, and it all began with Chris and Justin when they started talking about it during our staff meetings. And I got interested in it for basically the same reasons that they did. My students in my classroom, I found out, were just racking up these points for homework turned in, and many times I saw the students copying from each other, just so that they can get the 10 points for that worksheet, whether it was right or wrong. So I started to explore with the standards-based grading last year. I attempted a second semester, but I didn't feel like I was ready to jump in it. But I continue to talk to Chris on a regular basis about it. I like the idea. I like where I wanted to go with it, and that's in Spanish we have just 4 standards, but one of the main standards is communication. But you must be able to communicate speaking, to engage in a conversation. You have to be able to read and write, of course, and then make a presentation. And it has to be done in the target language, Spanish. But in the past, my kids were turning in really good work, whether it was written work. But at the end of the semester or at the end of the year, the same student who was getting an A because he or she was turning in good written work, the speaking ability wasn't there. And it was hard for me to create some activities to be more individual. And I think with the standards base, it's so clear what they have to do. We focus on the standards, we focus on what they have to do in order to communicate in Spanish, orally and written, so the students know what they have to do. So now I have students, very few students will have an A in my class, but they know what they have to master. They have to master the speaking skills as well as the written skills. So I like where it's going. It is taking a lot of work, organization for one.
And you can't gloss over, because you've told the kids what all the standards are in your classroom. If we don't teach, like in my class, we don't do as much on art history. If I don't teach on art history for the whole first semester, the kids ask, why don't I have any points in the art history standard?
Yes.
Because I notice that I'm going to be graded on that. And so then it forces me to be a better teacher and to really look at that.
It's a guaranteed curriculum.
Right.
It forces you to make sure that you've got that.
That I'm covering the things that I say I'm covering. I like that it really opens itself up for performance assessment, because in my classroom, and I know in some other classrooms for sure in Spanish, I tell my kids it's like playground taunting. You're going to come up to my desk and I'm going to say, prove it. Like, you say you can do this, prove it. And if you can't, then you're not going to get a mark on the assessment. And if you can, you do get a mark on the assessment. But I want to see evidence. And so as a district, we're working on some evidence outcomes things to be more a part of our curriculum. We are already setting that up, because we have to prove as teachers and students together that you did or didn't learn it to do a standard, to get the mark in that standard. Before, I could give an assignment and the kid didn't know what I was testing, and I didn't know what I was testing sometimes. But now I'm like, well, no, I've tied that to this standard over here, and it goes with this evidence outcome. I unpacked my standards and rewrote them in a way that I really felt was kid-friendly and Mr. Miller-friendly. As an art teacher, I have a bent that I'm going to take my classes that another art teacher isn't necessarily. But I want to take my ideas and make it so that kids can see them. And the standards base has allowed me to articulate that better, I think, than points accumulation did.
I think my students now in my classroom, I was talking to Chris one day at lunch when I asked the kids, here's your assignment, what do you have to do to get an A or the advanced? And they were able to answer the question, I have to go above and beyond what you're asking us to do. So when they said that, I was like, oh, yes, they understand it. Now it's just, and it's taking a whole quarter for some kids, though, to understand what they really have to do. So now a student that would have had an A in my class last year is now probably at a partially proficient. So that's what we talk about. Now we don't even talk about 90% or 100%. We talk about being advanced, being proficient, or being partially proficient, or in some cases being unsatisfactory, which means you're just not performing. So I like the talk that is going on in the classroom with my students. I feel like they understand it. They understand what they have to do. So now we have projects that we have at the end of every unit that I teach, and so we call these projects evidence of learning. and they already know. And I tell them, your evidence of learning project, I have to be able to see that you can communicate to me in Spanish with all the Spanish that we have learned up to this point, that you can speak in a way that I can understand you. And it lets me know that you understand what you're saying, that you're not just saying something to say something in Spanish. So I've had some really nice recordings. We use the iPod to record either conversation with another student, or I also give them different projects where they can do an individual project. So differentiation comes in technology. They're exploring. If they can do something well on their own, then they're more than welcome to. And I always tell them too, don't limit yourselves to the options that I'm giving you. These are just suggestions. If you find a different way to show me that you've learned how to say good morning, then by all means, explore that.
It seems then that you're really asking the kid to think, to come up with some more ideas, and you're expecting him to think about the standards and to figure out how he's going to prove it. And I was struck by something you said, and I don't know if I can articulate it, but you were not giving ones or zeros, and now you're giving a 1 to 4 scale on blogs. And how are they having to prove to you in science that they understand? And I was wondering, it was going beyond the 10-question worksheet that it used to be into a, now I have to articulate it to you in writing. How is that working in your class?
Much more so. I think it's working a lot better for exactly what Eva was saying, that there is a variety of ways to meet a particular standard. So I'm a big fan of really broad standards. So mine aren't drilled down to the exact vocabulary words the kid has to use. I use very broad categories, say like cell membranes. Right? So that's a standard in the book. Under that, the kid can talk to me about the structure of the membrane. They could do labs to show the function of the membrane. They can do assignments that looked a lot like the worksheets that I used to do, but kind of put their own spin on them, upload those to the blog, or they can go and do just a massive research project, putting together anything, all those web tools kids play with these days, the Prezzies, the Google Docs, the whatever else, and I don't dictate which tool they have to use, but they, as long as they direct their studies toward understanding how cell membranes work, I'm pretty happy with that. And it doesn't have to be incredibly specific. You must answer these 5 questions, or we don't even hardly test terribly often, save the occasional quiz. That's even that can be directed. All right, kids, this is a quiz. It's aimed at meeting lab skill standard 3 that says you must understand the purposes behind a lab. And well, I'm going to put some questions on there about, well, did you really understand the lab? And then the test can be still used, but it's now a very standards-based test rather than just, oh, hey, you passed the test and got 100 more points to throw into your total. You can still use a lot of the same assessments, but put them in and combine them with new assessments that the kids are coming up with. So it becomes, like Eva said, it's very differentiated. Each kid is doing something a little different. That kind of rules out the cheating thing, save for the occasional kid that tries copying blogs online. But that's usually pretty easy to detect.
Well, because that sounds overwhelming as a teacher. Talk to how you manage your grading and time.
The grading is more complex. It is. And as somebody who's behind on reading my kids' blogs at the moment, I'm very much
that's the challenge that I find.
Guilty of that.
And that's one of the challenges I'm facing right now is I have all these videos and iPod to listen to, or blogs, because we meet our standards for the cultural part of the foreign language through blogs, because we focus on communication in the classroom. That's my main focus. We blog, and so the grading, it's sometimes it's overwhelming.
It does, but it's amazingly rewarding compared to what I used to do.
Right. And I don't use written work, mostly because a kid can write about an art standard and present it even and show that they have mastered something, but they can't produce it. And so I ask them, higher level questions at my desk, one-on-one, follow-up questions to that and follow-up questions to that, where they can say, and then the two of us have a chance to really find out where it is that they're not getting it or that they are getting it.
Right.
And once I know that, I have a chance to communicate. But I will tell you that grading that way, if I have a class of 20 students, it takes me 3 days to work my way through all 20 kids. So art works that way because I can assign a project that's going to last for 2 weeks and I can grade it for 3 days. I also behind in my grading. That is probably the biggest disadvantage, I think, to this, is that there's a difference in the amount of time it takes to grade work. But like Chris said, once you do it, you know so much more than you did when you graded a worksheet or you. Because I've graded multiple projects in a day for multiple classes and know nothing about where those kids were really at. Yeah. But I can take 3 days in one class and I can pinpoint, I can tell you student by student how much they know about the given topic.
Right. I have some students who turned in Prairie presentations for vocabulary. And I can tell you what little Johnny did compared to what Chris did. Because little Johnny over here just gave me 3 vocabulary words and a picture. And that's it. But then I have Chris on the other hand, who wrote me a sentence that goes with the picture, even made a comparison or something else. And so, yeah, the big difference. And it's easy to grade. It's easy to say, okay, you got it.
You see the cream really rising.
And I said, okay, he still doesn't understand it, or sometimes I visit with them one-on-one. I haven't spent too much time on that, but go to their desk and say, did you do only 3 because you didn't want to do any more, or because you just don't understand it? So there is more.
And I think you do, once you've done it a while, this 4-point scale that several of us are using there's sort of like this constant rubric with that thing. Eva alluded to that earlier with the 4 or the A being, wow, that was really something I didn't ask you to do. It was really amazing and went above and beyond. You start, it becomes very easy to see that in the work as you see, yes, that's exactly what I wanted you to know. That's a great job on that. That's a 3. And then you run across something that's like, wow, that you just spent so much time on that, and that's such a quality piece that shows you really understand that. And likewise, the 2s and the 1s below that, it's like, well, you really didn't do anything, or well, you're getting there. I mean, and I've been asked about that several times. Well, you're doing standards-based grading. You must have a rubric for every standard.
Rubrics are killer. If I had to write a rubric and isolate the words that describe how well a student makes art, I spend all my time working on a rubric, and I never find out what the kid learned, because I end up with words like mostly and often and always and sometimes. And like, well, what is the difference between sometimes and often? And what is the difference between often and mostly? And what is the difference between mostly and always? Like, if they had one mistake somewhere in the project, does that mean they didn't understand it?
Well, then let's take that and step into, as Eva had said, and I wrote down, she had kids who had A's, and now with this they're partially proficient. And so you're there grading a project without a rubric and having a conversation with a kid. How do you relate that and talk to parents and explain to parents why my child who used to have an A now has partially proficient, or how they're supposed to help, or
instead of using a rubric, I use open questions. And it looks like a worksheet that you'd hand out, except it doesn't have any fill in the blanks. It says, prove to me that you can in the space below, and whatever it is that we're proving, and then they either draw or write about it. And the next one is, prove to me that you can do this, which is the second part of the objective, or whatever it is. And then when they come up to talk to me, that's what we're going to be discussing. And almost always, and this is something that maybe art can do better than some other classes, but I almost always have my kids pick their own number. Say, what is it that you think? I deserve a blank out of 4. I deserve a 3 out of 4. Well, yes, I agree. Or no, I don't. Yes, you should maybe have a 4. Maybe you should have a 2. We can bump that around and have the conversation about where that mark lies. But when it's done, I can say, you get to go home and tell your mom that you have a 3 in this because we decided as a group that that's the appropriate score. And when we decided it, you were part of that. I didn't assign it. It wasn't a punishment. And that's one of the things I really liked about changing from a rubric to an open question format.
It's kind of a guide for your conference.
Yeah, guide for my conference. But it freed me up because it wasn't Mr. Miller in a dark room putting marks on papers.
Right.
It was the student almost always providing the first input in the grade. They answer the questions, but then the questions set them up for what's appropriate. They give them what they feel is the most appropriate grade, and we can wrestle with it.
Which I think is really cool because I'm hearing if argumentative writing and thinking is across the district, that's indeed what a kid is having to do with you. They're having to present evidence and articulate to you why they should be here.
And we in the art room, we used to have try. I tried real hard, and I eliminated that. Try real hard is not a standard. Doing it or not doing it, that's where the standards are. Can you prove it? And if you can prove it, I'll give you the mark. Or if you can prove a third of it, I'll give you a third of the mark. If you can prove 75% of it, I'll give you the 3 out of 4. If that's the level you're proving it at, I want to give you the mark. But let's talk about it. And then at the end of the semester or the quarter when we have to pick grades, I just bring a kid up. I say, what do you want and why do you want it? So a kid says, I want a 78. And I think, this kid's an 85 student. Are you sure you don't want to be? Or sometimes they say, I want an 89. And I'm thinking, this kid's a D student. So I say, well, let's look at your standards. Do you do these things? And they can say, well, maybe I do this standard really well here. And I do that standard really well over here. And I do this standard really well over here. And then I get out a project when they had all 3 that they could have done at the same time. I say, do you do them all 3 at the same time? And then they can look at that project and they can come to a conclusion on their own. And I can mold that discussion a little bit, but they get to decide. And when they leave, I say, go home and tell your mom, you chose an 87 for this class. We discussed an 87. You get to decide that. I put it in the book. And then they're empowered with the knowledge ahead of time. When they go home, if they didn't have an A like they would have before when I was just piling up points, they know why. And they own their own learning. And that is so much different from before where I wasn't very clear on what I was grading for. They never knew. And the parents were completely in the dark about why my kid has an A, B, or C in art. Just like, well, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't understand art anyway. But now everybody can point to something as to why that number is there, even though for the most part it's a miraculous number.
Yeah, I mean that's what we have to realize in all of this, that grading is subjective no matter how you try to make it objective. And we're just trying to point it to specific things we want to be subjective about, right? I want to look for this, I want to look for that. With me, the major communications piece that I really enjoy is the blogs. If I have any concerns from parents, I could just say, well, have you looked at their blog lately? Do you see what they're producing? And 90% of the time that resolves the question right there. If the parent wants to know why a kid is getting a certain grade, go look at their work. I mean, if everything is available, visible online, and that is where the grade is coming from, then there's like Justin was saying, there's no teacher behind the curtain secretly grading things. It's there, publicly visible for everybody, and kids can see it too. And kids know what the 4s look like. They've been on each other's blogs. They know how to find them. We were talking the other day in biology about, oh yeah, well my blog gets a lot of traffic. Well, that's because we keep looking at yours. It's like, well, all right, well that's the kid that's getting all the 4s and really going above and beyond.
Those are being used as models.
They're being used as models because they're public and they're linked. You can go to my website and there's all the links for biology. Nice. There's all the links for anatomy, and they look at each other's stuff. That was part of the intent.
And having that sets it up for more of a performance assessment, and at the end of a performance assessment you have an artifact, whether that's a blog post, whether that in my class that's a project, in Eva's class that's going to be a recording or something that is real, that it's not in the dark anymore. I really can point people to artifacts. I started with some blogging and I liked some of what blogging did, but the technology got in the way of us actually making a lot of art. Yep. So we spent a day out of 5 blogging, and I would rather spend all 5 days painting and talking for a day once a week or so. So we changed some of the technology thing, but when we're done, they still have their painting, and we have my conversation guide sheet. So there are real artifacts. I love pointing parents to that because it makes it so much easier for me to explain anything that might be questionable.
And I've had that conversation with parents already. My student had an A all of last year in your class. Why is this very same student now has a B or a C? And it was nerve-wracking at the beginning, but then at the same time it was very easy to say, well, she or he is producing really good work with this standard, but this standard, which was the presenting verbally, it's just not there yet, and that is the reason why it's not an A, and it's still a B, or it may be a C.
So you felt like you could really articulate that.
I did, and some parents have said that they don't like that, but on the other hand, their student, I think, knows where they stand in class. They know that if they keep turning in all this really good written work, but they're not producing anything verbally, they're not going to get the A. It's one of those standards that you have to have. Right. And before, in my class, if I didn't do a specific activity for the whole class, then no one went out there and did anything. I would have to come up with the activity, assign it, and then present it or turn it in. But now I tell them, okay, we're coming to the end of the unit. What do you have to do now? Okay, it's time for an learning evidence or evidence of learning project. Now they know what they have to do. And I provide them with some of the tools that I have, which is the iPod, the computer, the video, and they're more than welcome to use whatever else, other tools that they may come across, and it's working so far.
So I've heard zeros to one and some change, so it's kind of morphed and changed as you are experimenting with it. So what do you see happening in the future? What's kind of close with that? Where is it going for you?
In my class, continued organization, both in presenting all the material that I want so that kids can see it easily and they can be in my system. That's something that I was really gung-ho about, and then I started teaching with it, and it is consuming enough that you can't teach that way and develop it at the same time. You have to develop it first and then teach later. So I have a summer or two of work. Probably each summer I'll build on some things, or Christmas break and whatever. But I think continuing to have an organized and clear format that the students can get into and see what all of those things are. Even small things like actually posting the actual learning outcome on the board. I know that seems like simplistic, but it's so much easier to talk to kids when they come up to my desk and say, oh yeah, see, this is the one thing I organized today. I did put up what we're doing. And so are you doing it? And we can talk, and that furthers, again, conversation in my classroom. So.
I think for me, it's I like where it's going. I'm definitely not going to drop it now. I'm going to continue with it, and like Justin said, organization. I have to organize it in a way where it's more transparent for the students and the parents both. Right now, I'm trying to keep up with what's the one that we use online? Google Docs. With Google Docs. And I'm finding that I'm falling behind in that, which is what the parents have available right now, is where I try to post specific activities or assignments that the kids have and how I grade it 1, 2, 3, or 4. But I'm finding that is becoming overwhelming for me. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole change. I like it, but it is very time consuming. So I'm hoping that with Infinite Campus in the future, I can assign a specific assignment and tie it directly to a standard where I don't have to keep up with the Google Docs. Is what I'm hoping.
Because that's like a second grade book.
It is, and it's so hard to keep up with it. And I have a couple of parents who constantly look at that Google Docs. Mm-hmm. Well, my daughter or my son said they did this last week. How come you haven't posted it? well, I have 120 other ones that I have to look at. So
we're going to see that with no matter what
yeah.
online system we have. But,
so that's the challenge that I have, and one of the things that I'm hoping it'll smooth out as we continue with this.
The major shift I did was some reading over the summer. So I piloted standards-based grades with my classes last year, and over the summer I did some reading. People really convinced that the numbers weren't what kids need. They needed real comments, real feedback. You know,
audience.
this, yeah, they need. Okay, so this blog post is a 3. Okay, it's still a number. It's still giving it a grade. But if you go in and say, well, you know, you really understand the role of these parts of the membrane, but you really don't understand what the proteins in the membrane are doing. You know, that's a much clearer feedback to the kid, and it gives them an exact target that they can fix. So I do like the Google Doc in the sense that this year I've tried to incorporate comments much more so than I did last year, and like Eva says, it's hard to keep up because, you know, to comment meaningfully on a lot of kids' stuff and not just great job is really hard. But I think it's really meaningful, and what I've tried to do on top of that is put the comments in so they could fix it, because they are going to put all of their stuff, all their blog posts are going to be organized by them into a portfolio. And we started this at the quarter, and frankly I've been really impressed with what they've put together. It forces them to say, okay, I did this blog back in August and that was about this topic, so that belongs here in my portfolio. The portfolio, instead of being chronological like a blog, it is by standard. So they specifically have a page on their portfolio for that standard. And if they click on that page or I click on that page and it's totally blank, it's really obvious, oh, I haven't met that standard. I need to do something about that. So, and I built it for the whole year, so they should come out of here at the end of the year with just a massive record of their biology class or their anatomy class or whatever, and it should be by standard that anybody, you know, because I do concurrent classes, if somebody from the college ever wondered, well, what are you actually teaching these kids? They could go, look, you told me that they needed to know this, this, and this topic. Oh, and look, here's their portfolio where they've laid out. I mean, literally, I use the college's language, and the kid responds that language. The goal was this. I put that in for them, and the kid says, I met that goal because link, link, link to all their blog posts that they do. And I'm really liking how that's working out. It's another layer of work, again, on top of.
It's one of those that once you've got it set,
yes,
it's usable again.
It was, and it was strangely easy to make the portfolios as a template that each kid could then just copy that, and now it's their own. It really was.
And then they do the work for you.
They do the work for me. They fill it in their own personal place.
Oh, I like that.
I will tell you that
work hard. You can.
Yeah, standards-based is not convenient. Points-based is very convenient.
Yep.
But it is not at all accurate. And so the switch from accurate to convenient or convenient to accurate, there are days when I yearn for convenient. but I've tried to make things more convenient, but I'm willing, anytime I ever do conferencing and I'm done with talking to kids about their projects, I'm like, that was so worth it. You know, I'm so much more willing after that to put in a little bit extra time to put together a template or put together something where, like, that will work because I see that I really do know. Or I get a chance to clean up after the lesson and say, well, you didn't learn that thing? Let's reteach it right here and go back through that at my desk. Oh, do you know it now? And then the next day I can go to their desk and say, do you remember what we talked about? And I can see either proof on their project or we have more chances for that, but it's not convenient.
Awesome.
I think you have to really believe in it and believe that it's going to work in your class, so you can make it work.
Well, and you format it for your class.
Yeah, you do.
You got to live with your standards.
It really does make you own the standards.
It does.
It really does.
In my classroom alone, every morning we begin, okay, today we're going to focus on this. We have all this other stuff to do, But today, this is our focus, right? And it forces me too to really look and see what I'm going to teach today, rather than jump from here to here and there and everywhere. I focus on one thing, and then I stick to it.
Well, thank you guys all for coming. I would love it if you talked about EdChat. Maybe you could send a link to that, and we can put that on here as well. And I don't know, I know you created your template for your standard base. I don't know if you're sharing that or something, but that might be something.
You can find it. There's a parent page at ludwig.lahamaschools.org.
Okay. The easiest way to do EdChat is to type in on Google $sign and EDCHAT, and you're going to find a way to get to a search of Twitter for EdChat. When it goes, a Tuesday at 10 here in the Mountain Time.
And 5.
Yeah, 5 in the evening. So at 10 and 5, it goes maybe 10 tweets a second. It really rolls along. But people are posting stuff fast and fast and fast. And it is all people doing the same thing we're doing, talking about a different topic every week. And so it's really exciting to get in there and say, well, this one is something I really want to talk about. And I can read a lot of tweets. I can even go back later and read through some of them. But I see links to blogs, and I see answers to questions, or I can ask questions, or I can answer questions that I might have insight into. And it is just a really great way in about an hour to get a lot of knowledge. And really, to me, I'm not a reader. I don't sit down and just read for fun about education stuff usually. It forced me to see exciting things that I could read about and digest quickly. I did more reading the year that I did EdChat. I was eating up blogs right and left because these people were saying stuff I just couldn't help but use. But yeah, $sign and EdChat would get you to a...
Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys very much.
You've been listening to Teachers Teaching on the Prairie. If you have any ideas for any future topics, just send it to kjsmith@lahunta.k12.co.us. Thanks so much for listening.